The show was still paused on her face when I finally looked up. Not Katie's face. The victim's face. A photograph from what looked like a birthday party or a barbecue. The kind of photo where someone caught you mid-laugh and you looked genuinely happy, and you had no idea anyone was taking it. She was 26. The caption said Austin, Texas, 14 years ago, and I remember thinking the photograph looked older than 14 years somehow. The way digital photos from that era always have that particular quality, that slightly flat color, like the world was a little less saturated back then. I was lying on my couch on a Sunday night with my laptop on my stomach and a half-eaten bag of pretzels on the cushion next to me and my phone in my hand. I had been texting my sister about something completely unrelated. I had been half-watching this documentary series on Netflix, the 3rd episode, something about wrongful convictions, and I want to be honest with you about the way I was watching it. Not closely. The way you watch things when you've seen enough of them that the rhythm is familiar and you're not really afraid of being surprised. I'd seen dozens of these. The structure is always more or less the same. There's a crime, there's an arrest, there's a trial, and then at some point the series tells you that something in the trial was wrong, and you spend the rest of the episode watching someone try to fix it. I was half there, maybe less than half, and then they showed her photograph and I thought, I know this case. Then I thought, how do I know this case? I put my phone face down on the cushion. I watched them go through what they always go through. The crime scene, the neighborhood, the timeline of that night, the investigation. And somewhere in the back of my head I was turning over this feeling that I recognized something, which didn't fully make sense because I had never consciously followed this case. I'd never read about it. I didn't grow up in Austin. I had no connection to any of it that I could name. Then they showed the name of the man who was convicted. Demetrius Washington, 34 years old, serving year 14. They said the key witness for the prosecution had placed him outside the victim's house that night. They said she had testified that she was certain, that she had used that word, certain. They said the alibi witnesses for the defense had not been believed, in part because of how certain she was. They showed her name, Katie Parsons. I looked at it for a few seconds. My laptop went to screensaver. I just want to describe that to you accurately. I wasn't watching it. I wasn't processing anything. I was just sitting in the dark with the screensaver throwing pale light on the ceiling, and I was looking at the ceiling, and the name was still in my head the way a word looks when you've read it so many times it stops looking like a word. Katie Parsons is my best friend. We have known each other for 22 years. She has never told me about a murder. She has never told me she was a witness in a trial. She has never once mentioned any night in Austin that involved anything like what that documentary was describing. And she was living in Austin then. We were living there together. Let me back up. Let me explain what I did after that, and why I can't just pretend I didn't see it. I grew up in a medium-sized city in the Midwest that I'm not going to name, which I realize sounds evasive, but stay with me. Katie and I met in college. We were in the same dorm freshman year, same floor, and we became the kind of close that happens when you're 18 and away from home for the first time, and the person 2 doors down has the same taste in bad TV and stays up until 2 in the morning talking about absolutely everything. That kind of close. The kind you either outgrow or keep forever, and we kept it. We lived together twice. Once in college, one semester senior year when my roommate transferred, and then again in Austin, after we both ended up there within about 6 months of each other in our mid-20s. Not on purpose exactly. We each had our own reasons for being there. But we found an apartment together because why wouldn't we? And we lived there for almost 2 years. Blue kitchen. That's the detail I remember first when I think about that apartment. Someone had painted the kitchen this particular shade of blue that was too bright for a kitchen, but we liked it. Squeaky floor in the front hallway, the kind that announces everyone who comes and goes. A window in the living room that didn't close all the way, which wasn't a problem until November, and then it was a problem. We had mismatched furniture and a good couch, and I remember that couch specifically because it was the kind of couch that was good for being on for entire Sundays, which we were. Frequently. I'm telling you the apartment because it matters later, or because I made myself remember it as precisely as I could. in the days after that Sunday. Because when I tried to remember October of that year, and the documentary gave the date, October 14th, 14 years ago, what I found in my memory was almost nothing. Not nothing. A few blurs, a feeling of that apartment in autumn, the particular quality of light through that living room window when the angle changes, Katie at the kitchen table, some version of a morning. But nothing specific enough to be a real memory, nothing with a date attached to it, nothing that placed me anywhere on any particular night. I told myself, that's normal. It was 14 years ago. Nobody has a clear memory of a random Tuesday from 14 years ago. But then I thought, Katie does. Katie had to. She testified in a trial. She told a jury she was certain she saw a specific man outside a specific house at 11:45 at night. Not approximately 11:45. At 11:45. That's not a memory that blurs. That's a memory you have held in your hands and turned over enough times that it has edges. And I cannot find a single specific memory from that whole month. I started to think about what that might mean, and then I made myself stop because I was getting ahead of myself. People don't remember things. It's not unusual. Memory is not a recording, I know that. I've read enough about how memory actually works to know that absence isn't evidence of anything. I'd been half asleep watching that documentary. I'd probably been getting a cold. The month was probably unremarkable. That's the most likely explanation. October was unremarkable and nothing happened to me personally that month, and so my brain filed it loosely, and the filing degraded over 14 years like everything degrades. That is the correct and rational explanation. I put the laptop on the coffee table and went to bed. I did not sleep until around 4 in the morning. I want to tell you who Katie is, because I think it matters that you understand what I was working against here. Not working against in a sinister way, just, the image I had of her was so solid, so built over so many years, that it functioned almost like a wall between me and the question I was trying to ask. She's a mom. 2 kids, 8 and 11. She's a bookkeeper. She works for a small business, something she genuinely likes. She's talked about the people she works with in the warm, specific way you talk about people who have become part of your daily life. She is the person who shows up. Her friend had a family crisis last year, and Katie drove 4 hours without being asked. She remembers everyone's birthdays. Not on social media, she actually calls. She's funny, the dry kind. The kind that catches you off guard. She once said something at a dinner party that made me laugh so hard I had to put down my drink. And I have tried to remember exactly what it was to tell this story, and I can't reproduce it, because that's how good timing works. It doesn't survive being explained. She's a good person. By every measurement I have ever used to measure that. I know that the phrase, she's a good person, by every measurement I've ever used, is doing a lot of work in this story. And I know it should be a comfort, but it isn't. Because I have used that same sentence about a few other people in my life, and I was wrong, twice. Not about crimes, about who they were, about what they were capable of that I hadn't accounted for. Twice I learned something that didn't fit the measurement I'd been using, and both times I had to go back and recalibrate the measurement, not the person, because the person was the one with evidence, and I was the one with assumptions. I know that. I have held that knowledge for years, and I still couldn't make it apply cleanly to Katie. That's what 22 years does. It makes the counter-evidence feel almost impossible to run, because you are the data. The second episode aired the following week. I watched it properly this time. I sat down with nothing else in my hands, no phone, just the laptop on the coffee table, and I watched all of it. The documentary's version of events was this. Demetrius Washington, who grew up in Austin, who had no prior record, was arrested 6 weeks after the murder based primarily on Katie's identification. The physical evidence from the scene was limited. No DNA match to Washington, no fingerprints, nothing that directly placed him there. The prosecution's case was built largely on her testimony. She said she was out walking her dog late that night. She said she saw a man standing near the victim's house, on the sidewalk outside it. She said she saw his face clearly under a streetlight. She said when she was shown a photo array, she identified him immediately, no hesitation. She said she was certain. The defense presented 4 alibi witnesses. friends of Washington's who said he was with them that night at an apartment across town. The jury didn't believe them, or didn't believe them enough. The jury believed Katie. Demetrius Washington was convicted and sentenced to 25 years. He has served 14. The documentary was careful. It didn't call Katie a liar outright. It raised questions about eyewitness reliability, which is real, which is a genuine documented problem with how convictions happen. And it raised questions about whether there was pressure on witnesses during the investigation. And it raised questions about the alibi witnesses and why they hadn't been more thoroughly cross-examined. It was raising questions, not answering them. That's what documentaries like this do. They give you the shape of the doubt without filling it in. But I kept coming back to one thing. She said she was certain. Not just that she thought she saw someone, not that she believed it was probably him. She said she was certain. And that certainty was the load-bearing wall of the whole conviction. I found the trial transcript. It's a public document. The trial was years ago. It's all a matter of record. I had every right to read it. I read it over about 3 nights, not all at once because I couldn't stay in it for more than an hour at a time. The prosecutor asked her, "Are you certain this was the same person?" She said, "Yes, certain." The defense attorney asked whether there was sufficient lighting to make a facial identification. She said, "Yes, there was a street light directly adjacent." The defense attorney asked whether she had known the defendant prior to that night. She said no, she had never seen him before. I read that line, "never seen him before," and I felt something catch, because I remembered, not clearly but in that partial way that's almost worse than not remembering at all. I remembered that when we lived together in Austin, Katie had a boyfriend, a man I didn't like. I cannot tell you now why I didn't like him. I have tried to reconstruct it, and I can't get anything concrete. Just an impression, a feeling I had when I was around him, something that made me go quiet in a particular way. He had a friend. I met this friend once, maybe twice, at some gathering at their place. I didn't like that friend either, and I also can't tell you why, except that the feeling was stronger. I don't know his name. I can see, vaguely, a kind of face, young, medium height, something about the way he stood. But that might be nothing. That might be my brain filling in a silhouette with whatever's available when I try to look directly at it. I don't know if it's relevant. I don't know if it's anything at all. But I couldn't let it go. We had a standing lunch about 2.5 weeks after I saw the documentary. We'd made the plan before any of this, and I thought about canceling and couldn't figure out how to do it naturally, so I went. I sat across from Katie at a place we both like, and I watched her. I want to be precise about what I mean when I say I watched her. I wasn't staring. I wasn't doing anything she would have noticed. I was having lunch with my friend, talking the way we always talk, covering the usual ground. Her kids, my work, something in the news, something that happened to a mutual friend of ours. Normal. Comfortable. She was exactly herself, the person I have known for 22 years, the person who makes me laugh and who I would call in a crisis without thinking twice. At one point, completely unrelated to anything we had been talking about, she mentioned that she can't watch true crime documentaries. She said, "I just can't do it. It's too grim. I don't know how people watch that stuff." I said, "I usually can't either." She looked at me for just a second. Not long, then she moved on to something else. I don't know what that look meant. People look at each other. It doesn't always mean anything. But I registered it, and I sat with it the whole rest of lunch, and on the drive home, and for the next several days. I kept asking myself, am I now seeing things in everything she does because I'm looking for them? Because that is a real danger. Once you have a filter, everything gets caught in it. Every pause becomes significant. Every word choice becomes evidence. You can build a case out of nothing if you're determined enough to look. I know that. I've seen it happen. It doesn't take bad faith. It just takes a story you've already committed to. But she was the one who brought it up. I didn't mention documentaries. I didn't say anything about true crime. She walked into that subject from somewhere else entirely and said those words. It could be nothing. It stayed with me like a nail in my shoe. 3 years ago, we took a road trip together. Katie drove. It was about 4 hours each way. I don't remember the exact destination anymore. It was something low-key. A wedding of someone we both knew peripherally, the kind of event that's really just an excuse for the drive and the conversation. We talked about everything the way you do on long drives, the way the car creates this kind of permission to go anywhere. Somewhere in hour 2 or 3, between a conversation about her kids and a conversation about something else, Katie said, "I think about the price we pay for the mistakes we made when we were young. Sometimes, you know?" I asked what she meant. She said, "Just sometimes, you know." And I thought she meant the boyfriend, probably. The one before her husband, the complicated relationship she's referred to obliquely over the years. Or maybe a job she'd left badly. Something ordinary. The kind of thing everyone carries. I didn't ask more. It didn't occur to me to ask more.
She hadn't opened a door exactly. She'd gestured at a door. And then she'd moved on, and I moved with her. The way you do. That moment came back to me, sitting in my apartment after the documentary. And it came back to me again after lunch with Katie. And each time it came back, it was a little different. A little heavier. She said the price we pay for mistakes we made when we were young. She said sometimes I think about it. 14 years is a long time to think about something, sometimes. I know how this sounds. I knew how it sounded then, too. I'm not making a case against Katie. That's not what this is. What this is me trying to tell you what it's like to hold two things at once that don't fit together, and to not be able to put either one down. About a month after the documentary, I called her. Not to confront her. I need you to understand that. I didn't have a script, I didn't have an agenda, I had been up most of the night, and in the morning I picked up my phone and called her because I couldn't sit with it anymore. I said, "I was watching a documentary about a murder case in Austin. Did you know about that case?" There was a pause. She said, "How do you know?" Not which case, not what documentary, not what are you talking about. How do you know? She knew exactly what I was referring to, and she already knew that there was something to know. I said, "I saw your name." There was a silence that lasted long enough that I stood up from where I was sitting and walked to the window, just to have something to do with my body. Then she said, "Can we meet?" Between the phone call and meeting her, I was in my apartment and I couldn't sit down. I walked from the kitchen to the living room and back, which sounds like a small circuit, but I did it for probably an hour. My downstairs neighbor must have thought something was wrong. I kept coming back to the car, to hour 2 or 3 on that highway. The price we pay for mistakes we made when we were young. I had nodded and said something sympathetic and followed her to the next topic, and I had done that because it hadn't occurred to me that the door she was gesturing at might be that, something like that. I thought about Demetrius Washington, not abstractly, specifically. A man I had never seen and knew nothing about except his name and that he was 34 years old and had been in a cell for 14 years. I thought about what 14 years means as a physical reality, not as a number, as a sequence of days, as everything that doesn't happen in 14 years. The decisions you can't make, the people you can't be, the version of yourself at 34 that you should have been able to become. And I thought, somewhere in that time, he had people who knew him. Somebody has known him for 22 years. Somebody sat across from him the way I sit across from Katie and thought, I know this person. I know who they are. And then his name appeared somewhere, in some context, in some way that made someone look differently. I don't know if he's innocent. I want to be clear about that. The documentary doesn't know either. That's why the documentary exists. Because nobody knows, not with certainty. And the certainty that was used to convict him was one person's word. It might have been right. Eyewitness testimony, even confident eyewitness testimony, has a real and documented failure rate that most people don't think about until they need to. But I kept thinking about those 3 possibilities, laying them out one by one the way you do when you're trying to be honest with yourself rather than arriving at a conclusion you already want. First, Katie saw someone. She saw a man near that house on that night. She looked at the photo array later, and she genuinely believed in the way that feels indistinguishable from knowing, that Demetrius Washington was that man. And she was wrong, not dishonest. Wrong. Eyewitness identification fails even when the witness is sincere, even when they're confident, even when the lighting was good and the look was direct and everything felt certain. Second, Katie saw someone and she wasn't sure, and she said she was sure anyway. Under pressure, under the weight of a police investigation and a prosecutor, and the logic of a situation that was already moving in a direction, and she said yes when she should have said probably, or I think so, or I'm not certain. And the distinction between those words was 14 years of someone's life. Third, Katie knew. She knew who she was and wasn't pointing at. She knew the man whose friend I had seen at a party once, the one I couldn't like and couldn't explain, and she pointed somewhere else. I don't know which one is true. I have spent a lot of time with all three and I still don't know. I don't think I'm supposed to know. That's not the kind of information that gets handed to bystanders. I'm not a detective. I wasn't there. The only person who knows what Katie saw, and what Katie believed, and what Katie decided is Katie. But I know what she said in that car 3 years ago, and I know how she answered the phone. I want to tell you about the meeting, and I want to tell you what I'm going to be able to tell you and what I'm not. We met at a place that wasn't a restaurant, not somewhere public with other people around us, not somewhere we'd been together before. A park, actually. We sat on a bench and it was overcast, the kind of November afternoon that stays gray all day, and I could hear kids somewhere in the distance and a dog barking. I'm not going to tell you everything Katie said. Some of it isn't mine to tell. And I want to be honest with you. Some of it I'm not sure I'm interpreting correctly. When someone tells you something that changes a load-bearing part of how you understand them, you have to be careful about what you're hearing versus what you're adding to what you're hearing. I was scared. I was sad. I was in the middle of a conversation I hadn't been prepared for in any real sense, and my ability to receive information accurately was not at its best. What I can tell you is this. Katie cried. For a long time. Not the kind of crying that's about performance. I've known her long enough to know the difference. The kind of crying that's the release of something that has been held in a place that isn't designed for long-term storage. And she said, I thought I was doing the right thing. Thought. Past tense. I thought I was doing the right thing. I did not ask her to clarify. I should say that clearly. I didn't ask her what that meant, or which version of those 3 possibilities it was coming from, or what exactly she had told herself. I sat next to her on that bench and I listened, and I did not ask, partly because I didn't know how, and partly because I understood that whatever she said would become something I would have to carry for the rest of my life, and I wasn't sure, in that moment, how much I was able to carry. What I thought, sitting there, was, I thought I was doing the right thing. That phrase, the structure of it, the way it positions the person who said it as someone who had a thought about rightness, which means there was a question about rightness, which means somewhere in whatever happened, there was a moment where right and wrong were not obvious, where a choice was being made. You don't say, I thought I was doing the right thing about something that was unambiguously right. You just say, I did the right thing. She said thought. I went home and I sat with that for a while. Then I did the thing I'd been looking into since about the 2nd week after the documentary. There are organizations. I'm not going to name them specifically. I'll let you find them, because there are a few, and the right one depends on the state and the circumstances, that work on cases where there are questions about how a conviction happened. Not just DNA cases. Cases where there are questions about witness testimony, about what was known and what was disclosed, about whether the trial was built on something solid or something that looked solid from the outside. The Innocence Project is the most famous one. There are others that work alongside it and overlap with it. I called one of them. I described the situation generally, without using Katie's name, without giving specifics that would identify anyone. I said, there is a situation where someone who testified in a case may have information that was not fully disclosed. What would need to happen for that information to be reviewed? The person I spoke to was patient and specific. They explained what the process looked like, what kind of information matters, what kind of evidence can actually move a case, what the realistic timeline is, what the realistic outcomes are. They were honest that it's not fast, and it's not guaranteed, and a lot of these cases are much harder to reopen than the documentaries make them look. But they gave me a clear picture of what a door into this looked like, from the outside. A few days after the meeting at the park, I called Katie. I told her what I'd found, the name of the organization, the phone number, what they'd told me the process looked like. I told her I wasn't telling her what to do. I wasn't going to tell her what to do. This was not my story to navigate on her behalf, and I understood that whatever she decided would have consequences that landed on her life and her kids and everything she'd built, and that was real, and I wasn't pretending otherwise. I said, I just want you to know the door exists, and now you know it exists, and whatever you do with that is yours. She didn't say much. She said okay. She said thank you, which was strange to hear, but that's what she said. I don't know what she's done with it. I haven't asked. That might seem strange, like I should be following up, checking in, making sure something actually happens. But I've thought about it a lot, and I keep coming back to this. The choice to go through that door, if she goes through it, has to be hers. If I push her into it, whatever comes out of it is mine and not hers, and I don't think that's how something like this gets resolved in any way that actually holds. She has to decide she cannot keep carrying it, and I can't decide that for her. What I can do is know that she knows the door is there. I think about Demetrius Washington sometimes. Not constantly, that's not accurate, and I don't want to perform a weight I'm not actually carrying every minute. But sometimes, when I'm driving somewhere or falling asleep. A man who is, by now, 48 or so, who has been incarcerated since his mid-30s, who I have never seen and know only as a name and a photograph and a set of facts from a documentary I started watching on a Sunday night when I wasn't paying attention. I think about what I know and what I don't. I know that Katie testified. I know that her testimony was the thing that made the difference in that trial. I know that she said she was certain, and that she said, I thought I was doing the right thing on a park bench 14 years later while it was overcast and children were playing somewhere behind us. I know that I gave her a phone number, and she said, okay. I don't know what happened on October 14th in Austin, Texas. I don't know what Katie saw or what she decided or why. I don't know if the man whose friend I couldn't like at a party once was the man I think he might have been. I don't know if that matters. I don't know if any of what I think I remember from that year is real memory, or reconstructed memory, or just the brain doing what it does when it's trying to build a story out of fragments that don't quite reach each other. I know that for 22 years I did not ask. That's not self-flagellation. I'm not telling you I'm to blame for any of this. I'm telling you that I had a best friend, and I loved her in the easy, uncomplicated way you love someone you've known since you were 18, and you talk to her every week, and you go on long drives, and you hear her say the price we pay for mistakes we made when we were young, and you think, she means a relationship. She means something ordinary. And then one Sunday night you're lying on your couch, not really paying attention, and a name comes up on a screen, and the whole structure of 22 years shifts 2 inches to the left, and you realize you were never fully looking at it straight. The show is still in my continue watching list. I closed the tab after the meeting, but Netflix kept it right where it was. That last episode, paused at the moment where her name is on the screen. I haven't opened it again. I haven't deleted it either. It's just there, sitting in the list the way some things sit. Not closed, not finished, waiting on a decision I haven't made yet. I don't know if I'll ever go back and finish it. Maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point was never the documentary. Some things you don't continue. Some things just stay where they stopped.